It's that time again. Time to answer all your burning health and fitness questions. Welcome to Strong for Life Live. This is Coach Josh Wood down here in Hobart, Tasmania. And if you're catching this live, awesome. Good to see you. And if you're catching this on the podcast, please take a moment to leave some stars, like, review, send it to your grandma. All those things. They all help make this show possible. And yeah, you can always catch us on Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music if you're listening from the website. Now, this is Q&A episode 2. First time I went through a bunch of health and fitness questions that people had from the Become Strong for Life Facebook group, which everyone is welcome to join. Just make sure you answer the questions when you join up, and say that you're going to follow the rules. We had a good episode last time, so you can check that out, the Q&A episode 1. This is Q&A episode 2, and we've got a bunch of questions, really interesting questions, and questions from all over the place. So I'm just going to go ahead and dig into that. There aren't really any announcements. If you've been following along on socials or in the group, there has been some changes to the pricing scheme, but other than that, it's business as usual. Clients are kicking ass, taking names, getting leaner, getting stronger. And you know what? If you have any questions about that, feel free to hit me up. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get into the questions here. Now I've got them on another tab. There's always a tab, isn't there? All right, let's see. So I'm just going to work my way down the list. So let's start off with Chloe. And her question was first, what is the best way to exercise in perimenopause when you need to lower cortisol and protect joints that are vulnerable? It doesn't matter what your situation is. The best way to protect your joints, assuming that the actual connective tissue that holds them together, the ligaments, and the joint capsule, assuming that's healthy and you haven't injured it, the best thing you could do is build stronger muscles around the joint, whether it's your knee, your shoulder. Your shoulder in particular requires a lot of muscular control to stay healthy and to stay resilient. Just because that joint, the way it's structured, the actual shape of it makes it a bit loosey-goosey. It makes it not as stable as something like the hip, which has a deeper socket, and the shoulder has a very shallow socket. So the thing that really gives it the stability you need and mobility is muscle. You need to have strong muscles. So the very first thing is you need to build the muscles around those joints. If you want stronger knees, that's great. You're going to need to work on your quads and your hamstrings because those are the two primary groups that cross the knee and control its movement. The knee is a very, very stable joint, and that's primarily due to its really strong joint capsule, or the ligaments that support the joint. Now, the other stuff around that question would be things like, well, how does perimenopause come into it? And lowering cortisol. So the big issue that I often see with menopause, of course, is the risk of osteoporosis. So menopause for women is the cessation or the no longer producing estrogen, or estrogen in the amounts that are ideal. And because of the role estrogen plays in the formation of bone tissue, laying down things like calcium into the bones, it takes a bit more work and stimulus to make sure that you are looking after your skeleton. And osteoporosis is not a great thing to have. So big thing for that is resistance training. You need to put your bones under stress so that your body goes, oh, I need to work on making these stronger. And so one of the worst things that gets done as women age is they get told to do things like aqua aerobics and pool-based exercise, and you're putting yourself in a less gravity situation, meaning less resistance, almost no stress, no pressure on the joints, and no stress or pressure on the bones. And they're not going to get stronger if there isn't stress on them, because there's no reason for them to get stronger. So avoid pool stuff, but start a resistance training program if you are not on one. You need to do that for your bones, and you need to do that for your muscles, to keep and maintain the muscle mass that is necessary for being strong and independent into your older years. You need muscle to do that. You need strong hips and legs and core and shoulders, all that. If you're not doing resistance training can be body weight exercises, it can be bands, it can be dumbbells, barbells, machines, it doesn't matter. But if you are a woman going into menopause or want to get ready for when that does happen, you need to be doing a resistance training program to maximize your quality of life. And in terms of reducing cortisol, I mean, the best things you can do to keep your cortisol in check, because you have to have cortisol. Cortisol is what wakes you up in the morning. So you do need cortisol. You just don't want it to be in excess. And the biggest thing you can do is not avoid exercise, but avoid the other life stresses. Manage your sleep, eat well, work on any social stresses or work stresses. That's the most powerful way to reduce your cortisol. When it comes to exercise, the only thing I'd say is if you really are worried about the cortisol, avoid running marathons and doing high intensity interval training or CrossFit style workouts. Very cortisol heavy, but you do need a cortisol spike from exercise to tell your body to adapt to that exercise. So don't avoid hard work, avoid chronic stress. So if you are going into menopause or you're perimenopausal now or postmenopausal, it doesn't matter. Start a resistance training program, full body training, and I have a resource that I'm working on for that, a small ebook look on how to actually just put together a basic full body workout. So stay tuned, but start something. Start resistance training and up your protein to accommodate for that. You need way more protein than you think you do. If you want to build and maintain muscle mass, if you want to build strong bones, you need a lot of protein. And don't listen to anybody who says high protein diets leach calcium from your bones. I've heard that one a bunch of times. That has been absolutely debunked 1,000,001 times. You need the protein. It will help with bone formation. You need it for muscle mass. And as you age, you need more protein because your digestive system is less effective at using and extracting the nutrients you get. So eat more protein, lift some weights, and that is the best thing you can do. Okie dokie, let's see here. Next question. And these are not really in any particular order. They're just in the order that they came in. Sarah says, how do you determine what kind of workout split you prescribe to your clients, including the number of days with resistance training per week? That's an easy one. It's what you can do. It's what you want to accomplish and what you want to do. So it's first things first is, as I always say, understanding goals. If you are working heaps, high stress job, 36 children, a lot of work and family stress, you're really low on time, I'm not going to give you a 7-day split. I'm going to give you like 2 30-minute workouts. If you are late teens, early 20s, living at home, don't have a job, have all your parents' money, you can work out all the time, eat whatever you want, great. We might actually do a 7-day split. Probably not, but we might, depending on your training age and how often you like to do things. It all depends on what time is available and what you're trying to accomplish. So that's the basics of it. You know, most people can do everything they need in 3 days. And we might have a mixed split. We'll have 3 full body workouts or 2 full body and then a focus day, whether it's focus on arms or legs or back or butt or whatever it is. And then we'll do cardio 1 to 3 times a week. It all depends on what that individual wants to accomplish. I almost always try to start someone on 2 to 3 workouts if they've never trained before. And I find 3 to 4 is more than enough for almost everybody. And that's resistance training. That's weights and strength or hypertrophy or athletic training. And then adding in what cardio is available. And in terms of what cardio I'll prescribe or recommend, depends on, again, time. If you're like, I can barely fit in these workouts, I love them, I'm going to keep doing them, but I can't fit in much cardio, I'm like, cool, take a 10-minute walk after each meal. 3 times a day minimum. There you go, 30-minute walk. Do that every day of the week. That's 3.5 hours. Easy peasy. It's 3.5 hours of movement and cardio that you otherwise wouldn't get. So it's goals. We have to figure out what the best option is for the goals, and then what can actually be done based on what that client has available for time and effort. Like what can you do? You may have all the time in the world, but if you don't have the desire to do a whole bunch of training, we're going to have to optimize it for less sessions. So let me just make sure I've covered that. What kind of workout split prescribe to your clients? Yeah, it just depends. If we want to get into the nitty gritty of programming, and I've talked about this a little while ago on this podcast, but the other thing is recovery ability. So everything in programming is that balance between like fatigue to reward ratio. How much stress can we put you under that you could actually recover from? You may have the time to do 7 workouts a week, but you might just end up broken. Well, that's not going to be good. Maybe you can only recover from 3. That's fine. So there's a lot of things to optimize, but it's always going to be about goals first and time available. Time available for effective work. All right. Marlies says, curious on your thoughts on HIIT training, HIIT, high intensity interval training, being the most effective way to get fit and lose weight. It's not, it's time efficient, but I find it's one of those things that the amount of effort and willpower it takes to do a truly high intensity session. If you're doing a HIIT session, quotes here, air quotes, if you're doing a HIIT session that lasts more than 20 minutes, 45-minute hour session, it's not HIIT training. It's just circuit cardio. High intensity means you are working very close to your maximum threshold. So if we do this in terms of weight, your maximum intensity would be your 1 rep max on an exercise. For something like running, high intensity would be like the maximum distance you can run at top speed. So say you can run 50 meters at top speed before you slow down. Okay, well that's maximum. How many times do you think you can do that? How many times can you pull your 1 rep max? The answer is few, very few times. So if you're doing that for an hour, you're not pulling your 1 rep max. You're not pulling 90% of your 1 rep max. You'd be taking 10, 15-minute rests, and still you'd only do it a few times. So true high intensity interval training is actually working really, really intense, working really high on your capacity scale, and you can only do that a few times. So anything high intensity that supposedly goes for more than sort of 20-ish, 15, 20 minutes is not truly high intensity. It's hard work, but it's cardio for the most part. So the fatigue to reward ratio for HIIT training is not always a good balance for most people because it takes a while to recover from. It takes a lot of effort to get it done, but it's a very short amount of time. So for the amount of time you invest, it's a great investment. You get great rewards on that. It's very high density training. You're doing a lot in a very low amount of time. But I don't know many busy parents and professionals who are time poor who can do a lot of those and recover because they're very high stress, very fatiguing. But for the time investment, you do get great rewards. You do get a really good return on investment in terms of, fat burning and muscle mass and conditioning. So I don't almost never program that stuff because I find that it takes more effort and more stress than you get from it in terms of recovery. Most people just need to dial in their diet. You can never outwork a poor diet. 99.9% of the people I work with just need to dial in a few diet basics and do a little resistance training to build some muscle mass and then progress that over time, and boom, all of a sudden they're lean, jacked, loving life, feeling good, high energy. So I don't often use HIIT. I don't find it to be a great balance for most people. But if you do it consistently and you enjoy it, it's a great option. It's just that recovery component doesn't tend to always be there for most people. All right. We got another question from Laura. Being new to strength work, when should I be increasing my weights? You should be increasing your weights when the current weights you are using are too light. Okay, great show, guys. Close this down. Awesome job. No, I'm just kidding. So that's the long and short of it is if they're too light. So this, and Laura is one of my clients. So imagine I've prescribed something like squats, goblet squats, great squat variation. So you got goblet squats, and you need to be doing somewhere between 10 and 15. And let's say you're doing it at maximum capacity. So we'd call it 0 in reserve. You have no more reps left in the tank when you do a set. So if you're using 20 kilos for your goblet squats and you do 10 reps, you should keep that weight until you can hit the high end of your rep range. So in this case, it was 10 to 15 reps. So if you can do 15 reps on each of your sets with 20 kilos, then you up the weight. So if you've got a rep range that you're working on, you work on the range and the reps in reserve number, your intensity number first. And then when you've maxed that out, if you hit your reps in reserve and you've maxed out the number of reps you can do at a set weight, you increase the weight. And then you might go up to 25 kilos and find that you can barely make 10 reps for each set. Great. Keep that weight until you do 15s on everything, and then add more weight. That's the easiest way. For general strength, general hypertrophy work, that is the most simple way. That's the way I start almost every new gym goer. When I worked with people in person, I basically figured out what they could do, did a movement assessment, said, okay, let's do these. All right, so you can do about 15 squats with body weight. So I'm going to give you, 5 or 10 kilos and do as many as you can do. And they're like, okay, they do 12. I'm like, great. We'll rest a bit, do another set, as many as you can do. And they do 11, and then they do 10. And then we keep that weight each week, every time we come to that exercise, until we can do sets of 15 at the prescribed intensity. So that's the easiest system. You choose a rep range, you do as many reps as you can at a set weight, and then when you max out the rep range, you add more weight. It's a little bit different for strength training, but for general purpose stuff, that's the easiest way to do it. All right. Gemma, our half marathon runner, soon anyway. Gemma asks, is carb loading the day before still a thing for peak athletic performance? She was on the group coaching call this morning. And so she's got a half marathon coming up. Now, let's talk about what carb loading is first. Generally, people would consider having a giant carb-heavy meal the day before some sort of competition because it's supposed to be good for your performance. Now, the only reason that would be good for your performance is if your glycogen, the stored glucose, stored carbohydrate in your muscles and in your liver, is depleted. If it is not, if you have full glycogen stores because you eat moderate carbs or carb refeed after big workouts, then there is no need for a carb reload or carb loading. You can't load beyond your glycogen stores. And just so if people aren't familiar with this, glycogen is the storage form of glucose, which is what all carbohydrate breaks down into. It's used for energy in the body. We store it in the liver and we store it in the muscles. We want to and need to store it in those places. You're supposed to store it in your liver. And so when you are doing exercise at a moderate rep range or sort of in the middle distance of things, if you're doing stuff from 2 to 10 minutes at fairly decent intensity, you start to feel that burn, or you might get nauseous, or you start to feel real sluggish and heavy and a bit woozy. That burning sensation is generally when you are burning glycogen. It's not because of the glycogen, but when you are feeling that burn, you are doing generally what we'd call glycolytic activity. You are doing exercise that uses the glycogen and uses that as a main storage or main fuel source used from our storage. Whereas cardio, long distance, long duration stuff uses oxygen more so for refueling our muscle energy stores. So glycogen is it's not short duration, but like 2 to 10 minute, fairly intense work. If you're doing middle distance sprints, 100 to 400 meter runs, that stuff kills you. You're sucking wind and everything burns and you want to throw up. That's glycolytic exercise. And everything in CrossFit, high intensity interval training, it's all glycolytic. So you need you need to replenish those glycogen stores after training to be able to train more and improve your recovery. So after that kind of training, yeah, you're going to want to get some good carbs into you and replenish those stores. Long distance running, not really. If you're eating carbs every day, you're fine. You don't need to carb load. And when it comes to fueling for this type of thing and competition, the worst thing you could do is eat differently the night before a competition, because you're already going to have nerves. You're probably going to feel a bit weird. And then having a giant meal that's different from what you normally eat the night before may cause you to shit yourself. And I'm not joking. So the thing you want to never do in competition is change your routine around competition. Don't eat something big and greasy and different from your normal meals the night before or the morning of. Don't fuel differently on the day. Fuel and train and eat exactly how you would for normal training. That is my best advice to you. So don't, if you eat a big bowl of spaghetti normally at night, or a pile of bagels, whatever it is, something carb heavy, and you feel fine, great. But don't plan a big carb meal beforehand, because it can cause some digestive distress. And for long distance running, you really don't need to carb load. It's really not really a thing. All right. Kathy, how do I reverse type 2 diabetes? Now, this is not medical advice. I am not a doctor in the Western sense. So what I can do is pass on information that I'm aware of. So for those of you that don't know, diabetes, type 1 diabetes is what we used to call type 1 diabetes is primarily like an autoimmune disease, or it's acquired from birth. Usually an issue with the pancreas. There could be a couple other things involved, but essentially either you don't produce insulin, or well, yeah, no, it's basically you don't produce insulin. You don't produce insulin, which you need to regulate blood sugar. I'm just thinking of a couple cases in which type 1 diabetes has happened because, or in adulthood because of traumatic accident. So a car accident, and there's been damage to the pancreas, you no longer produce insulin. But generally speaking, type 1 diabetes is from birth, and it needs to be regulated with insulin. Type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset, but now kids are getting it and young people are getting it because of lifestyle. So type 2 diabetes is not that your pancreas is not producing insulin, it's that you are becoming resistant to the insulin. So you need insulin to shunt glucose from your bloodstream into tissue. It's vital. You have to do this, otherwise you die. And a lot of the complications from diabetes are things like vascular and nerve damage, and then people have to have limbs amputated. It's not good for your brain either, but essentially too much high blood sugar for too long kills you. So type 2 diabetes is when your body is no longer essentially responding to that insulin that's being produced, and your body keeps trying to produce more, and you just run into blood sugar dysregulation. There are a lot of other conditions associated with insulin resistance. There's what we call metabolic syndrome, or diabesity, where that insulin resistance is part of the obesity disease in an individual. Things like Alzheimer's and polycystic ovarian syndrome have some insulin resistant elements to them. Like, it can cause a lot of things, and it's integrated into a lot of conditions. Type 2 diabetes is generally a lifestyle disease. And the number one thing that you can do to improve your insulin sensitivity is lose body fat. Now, there are people who say, well, skinny people get diabetes too. And it's like, yeah, but not really. So lean people, generally, as far as I'm aware, do not get type 2 diabetes. One of the things that seems to be very common in type 2 diabetes is that your body stores a lot of body fat. And the reason you have a lot of glucose floating on your blood is because of your eating habits and lack of exercise. Exercise helps shunt glucose out of the bloodstream into the tissues, not needing as much or any insulin at all. So the most important thing is to look at your body fat and reduce it. That is one of the easiest ways to increase insulin sensitivity, and that can be done. You can do that purely through diet. I've read cases of individuals who just focused on reducing body fat, and their type 2 diabetes went away. Some people do it through exercise. Exercise is not the most effective thing for losing body fat. Diet is. And then, of course, you can't outtrain a poor diet. So if you are dealing with type 2 diabetes, the best thing you can do is start looking at getting leaner and more active and looking at your diet. And that's kind of the secret sauce to just being healthy in general. Something to consider. Something to consider that is not medical advice. And I think those are all the big questions. Let me just double check that nothing popped up. Pretty sure we just had 8. Diabetes, carb. Okay, so just recapping, we've covered everything from training and perimenopause. We covered how I choose exercise splits for clients. We went over high intensity interval training. We looked at when to increase your weights, when doing strength training, what's the deal with carb loading in terms of peak athletic performance, and how do we reverse type 2 diabetes while not giving medical advice. That's pretty good. I'm happy with all that. So, folks, once again, this is Coach Josh Wood down here in Hobart, Tasmania. It's our normal Tuesday time slot. And if you've made it this far, please take a moment to leave a comment or a question or some feedback on this episode. Share it with your friends. Tell your grandma about it. And yeah, let's just keep getting stronger. Keep getting stronger so that we can get more out of life. And until next week, have a good one.